Hi, my name is Jamie. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about how Man of Steel is an amazing representation for adopted kids and adoptive families, and how it completely eliminates all of the harmful stereotypes of adopted kids, like, the whole flight risk thing, and how adopted kids will never accept their adoptive families. And yeah, I really want to talk about how hopeful this film is and how amazing this film is, and sort of explain it to the people that might not understand it, because I know I have seen some discourse about this film, and how it represents, Superman as a character, and, how people feel that it sucks the hope away from this character. But, for me, it puts a lot more hope into the character. So I do hope this video, helps to explain all of that. So I don't see a lot of people discussing the importance of representation for adopted kids in media. And it's something that I personally, as someone who is adopted, I didn't get to grow up with, and I didn't get to experience, really good representation in films and shows. And one of the few pieces of media that represents adopted kids well is Man of Steel, which was directed by Zack Snyder, who is an adoptive father himself. So today I'm going to be breaking down a bit of Man of Steel and how it represents adopted families extremely well. So to start off, I think we need to talk about Martha and Jonathan Kent, who are Clark Kent's adoptive parents. Martha and Jonathan found Clark in their field on their farm when he was a baby and he was sent from Krypton. And I personally see them as two people that couldn't have children, and this baby basically falls into their arms, and it's sort of like a miracle for them. So along the way, they sort of become these two very selfish parents, and that's not a bad thing. To me, that's accurate representation of adoptive parents. Adoptive parents can be a bit selfish, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to be a selfish parent, but I do think that it really affected Clark's relationship with his father, especially when he got older. Now, as an example of that, we have Jonathan telling Clark that he shouldn't have saved the kids on the bus. And that scene is essentially a metaphor for how adoptive parents feel when their child is growing up and sort of becoming, who they are, and exploring nature versus nurture. And in that moment, you see a bit of Clark's nature coming out instead of, how Martha and Jonathan raised him. And another example of that is the car scene where Jonathan and an older Clark are talking. And Clark is essentially explaining to Jonathan that he doesn't want to stay on the farm. He wants to get his own job and live his own life. And Jonathan is very like, no, no, no. Your whole family, they were farmers, so now you have to be a farmer too. And that's something that Clark doesn't necessarily want for himself. And it got so heated that he even turned to Jonathan and said that you're not my real dad. You can't tell me what to do. You're just a guy that found me in a field. And that's something that, I personally, I know I have said, and it's something that, you immediately regret. And I know that's very accurate for adopted kids, to say, to your adoptive parents, like, why don't you just take me back? Or, I'm not your real kid. You can't tell me what to do, things like that. And, you can tell in that scene that there is immediate regret on Clark's face when he says that. And that's something that is very accurate, and it's often not portrayed in media, with adoptive families and adopted kids. The same thing goes for the scene where Jonathan shows Clark the spaceship in their barn. That scene is incredible. Like, it tears me up every single time, because this is something that I think came from, personal experience. Like I said, Zack Snyder adopted some of his children. So I think that scene is essentially, something that every adoptive parent wants to tell their kids. You are my son no matter what. You're my child no matter where you came from, what background you are, if we share blood or if we don't share blood, that you are still my child. And, Clark even said, that he, I'm just pretending, but to Jonathan, he wasn't pretending, and, he was his father. That's that's it, you know. Family isn't necessarily blood, and that's what that scene represents. And I think it's one of the most beautiful scenes in the film that a lot of people tend to overlook. But I do think, like I said, that that's from a lot of personal connection to the topic from, you know, the director behind the film. Jonathan's selfish father arc sort of carries over into Zack Snyder's Justice League during Clark's flight scene after he was resurrected. And he gets the scout ship, and as he's about to take off, he hears the voices of both his fathers. He hears Jor-El and he also hears Jonathan. And instead of Jor-El telling him to fly, like he did, you know, during his first flight in Man of Steel, we hear Jonathan tell him, "Fly, son, it's time." And it sort of is Clark, you know, realizing and embracing both of his fathers. And it's also Jonathan letting go of his son and letting go of all of that selfishness so that his son can fly and his son can, you know, be as great as he knows his son can be. So that's something that I know is going to be hard for my parents because, you know, if I, you know, when I move out and when I leave, it's going to be a bit hard for them to sort of see that happen. I know, and I know they've expressed that a bunch of times, and I think that scene is definitely extremely accurate for, you know, representing adoptive families in that way, that, you know, adoptive parents do have a hard time letting go of, you know, their child that they raised, and, you know, it as something that they've always wanted. It was, you know, it's letting go and starting a new chapter. Now onto Martha Kent. So there is one huge standout scene for me involving her and Clark, and it's when he comes back after finding the scout ship. And he tells her, you know, "I know where I came from. I found my family." And she is so over the moon excited for him, and she's so happy, and he's so happy. But the gears in her head are turning, and she realizes, you know, what if he no longer sees me as his mother now that he knows where he came from? And I know for me personally, as someone, I did get a chance to find my birth family, and I could get a bit of that type of, you know, energy after I had come home from it, you know, from my adoptive parents, that, you know, there was a bit of, oh, now that she, you know, found her birth family, you know, what is our relationship going to be like? And I can tell you right now that, you know, they are still 1010% my parents. You know, they raised me, you know, I got so much from them. I got my love of Superman from my adoptive father. I got a lot of my love of music from my mother, you know, the different genres I listened to. And so Clark, after Martha gets like that, he comforts her and he tells her, "No, you know, no one's going to take you from me. I'm going to stay right here." And I think that, you know, is also accurate for what, you know, any adopted kid would tell their parents if that situation came up. I think we should also touch on Clark's birth parents, Jor-El and Laura, and the importance of portraying them the way that they are portrayed in the film. And a lot of times it's not very talked about how brave birth mothers are and how brave birth parents are in general. And to me, I see birth mothers as some of the bravest people in the world because they do what is best for their child. They put that child before themselves and before what they want. A lot of times children are given up for adoption, you know, so because the mother isn't ready or they're not in a safe situation, or, you know, it's just going to be better for them to be in a different household. And, you know, there is a whole lot of grief and a whole lot of loss that goes along with that, for not just the birth mother, but for also the birth father, who is equally involved in the decision. And we see that struggle with Laura. And, you know, she's seen, you know, making excuses, you know, "Can I just hold him a bit longer? You know, what if we send him away and he dies? What if Earth isn't safe for him? What if he dies in space alone? You know, but in her head, she realizes that Krypton is already doomed. So if he stays there, he dies. But if she risks sending him away, he could live and he could have a good life, which he did. And he's protecting the earth and he's doing all of that, because of her sacrifice. When it comes to nature versus nurture, which I had mentioned earlier, Jonathan Kent and Jor-El are two very contrasting people, and they're two contrasting characters in the story. So Jor-El sent Clark to Earth so that he could make his own decisions, because on Krypton, every child was born, with a destiny, and they, were sort of told who they have to be, what job they have to do, what family they go to. Their DNA was in the codex and they were born artificially. And Clark was the first natural born Krypton in years. And so they took a risk by doing that. And then they took a risk by sending him to Earth so that he could learn to make his own decisions and he could be free to be who he wanted, as well as to protect the remaining codex and the remaining parts of Krypton. So in contrast to that, we have Jonathan, who essentially wanted to keep Clark in his own bubble, and he wanted to keep him safe, and he wanted to protect him, which is the same thing Jor-El wanted. But Jonathan wanted Clark to be a farmer, wanted him to, be safe and kept away. And Clark wanted to help people. He wanted to get a different job. He wanted to leave. But that's not something Jonathan wanted. And that just shows how different these two men are. But they still wanted the same thing for their son. They still wanted Clark to be safe. And you see that nature in Clark is starting to take over. When he wants to leave and he wants to use his powers for good and he wants to save the world, instead of nurture, which would have been staying on the farm and being a farmer like Jonathan wanted. So I hope this made some sense, and I hope this clarified a few things, for the people that do feel like this film sucked some of the hope away from Superman. And I hope that, you realize now that for some people it is very, very hopeful. And, for me, it's very hopeful, and it represents, adopted kids like me, adopted families like mine. So I might make this a series. I don't know. I might, make a few more videos on maybe Man of Steel and just Zack Snyder's Superman in general. But yeah, if you enjoyed this, click subscribe below. I'll link some of my social medias, like my Twitter, my Vero, that type of stuff down there. So see ya.